All right, so week 5, symptom monitoring. Yes, we have talked about symptom monitoring in series 1, but just like all of the other topics, we're going to talk about them a little more in depth for series 2. So I know you guys are doing your symptom monitoring. I read your notes where you're doing GAT7s and PHQ9s, and you're doing other types of symptom monitoring. So today I'm going to kind of challenge you to not only monitor symptoms in different ways, but maybe start thinking about symptoms differently, and maybe also try combining some techniques. Today, we're going to talk about doing one technique to monitor symptoms and then following that up with another one. Or maybe getting somebody in a good frame of mind first with some mindfulness or with some relaxation or with some guided imagery, so they can then really observe their symptoms. If you just walk into a room and ask somebody, hey, how are you doing? What are you experiencing? That can be kind of jarring, especially people, with anxiety might need first to engage in some calming or some coping skills to even know what's going on in their body, or to know, what's going on with their emotions, or to be in touch with, what are they thinking? So we're going to talk today also about combining activities, combining interventions as kind of a more advanced way to implement TBS services. So today we're going to talk kind of uniquely or kind of separately about physical symptoms, thought symptoms, behavior symptoms, and emotion symptoms as being kind of 4 distinct different categories of things to be tracking or symptoms to be asking about. But I also want to just be clear that oftentimes those are going to overlap, or it may be hard to sometimes tease apart, what is the behavior from what is the thought, or, where does the thought end and where does the emotion begin? Sometimes, especially with physical symptoms, those are very much tied in with our emotions. So we are trying to isolate them to make it more specific about what it is that we're tracking or what it is that we are observing, but also at the same time recognize there's going to be some overlap, and clients themselves may not be able to really describe sometimes the difference, and there may be some bleeding from one category into the next. So I kind of alluded to mindfulness, and I kind of want you to think about symptom monitoring really as being mindfulness. So let's start with what mindfulness is, and we'll talk about how it's related to symptom monitoring. So kind of a basic definition of mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment, just noticing your own feelings, your own thoughts, and your own sensations. So just being aware, but not putting a good or a bad label on something. Just simply, I feel the socks on my feet, or I smell, the scent of daffodils in the air, or, I hear the garbage truck coming down the street. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but it's what I'm noticing, it's what I'm experiencing. That's kind of a real basic definition of mindfulness. If you are doing any kind of mindfulness activity, please be clear in your documentation the reason, though, that you are engaging your client in the mindfulness activity. It should relate back to their mental health diagnosis. And the reason I kind of want to be clear about why it's important to state things like that or to fully explain it is, again, sometimes I'll be reading a progress note and I'll hear things like, TBS engaged client in mindfulness, or engage client in a mindfulness activity, and then that's it. I don't really hear any reason or rationale as to why, or what it was that we were being mindful of, or how we're using the information that you obtained from that mindfulness activity as symptom monitoring, or how you used it, going forward in the session. Like, what was the reason for doing that mindfulness activity? So that's kind of one point that I wanted to make relating mindfulness to documentation. And then I also kind of want to be giving you some heads up that you may want to also educate or psychoeducate your client also on what mindfulness is, and also kind of give them a heads up that being mindful of what's going on can sometimes be unpleasant. It may bring up things that they're not aware of until they actually are sitting and being told, to be aware of those feelings, those thoughts, those sensations. So yes, mindfulness is a good thing. It can be relaxing, but I think you also need to prepare your clients that it could also bring up uncomfortableness, or it could bring up something they weren't aware of until that moment. So kind of prepare them both ways, for the relaxful part of mindfulness as well as anything unexpected or maybe something unpleasant that could come up through that process. So please preface any kind of mindfulness activity with some psychoeducation, especially if they've not done it before, or if they don't know what you're talking about when you say the word mindful. So things that you may be looking for as you're engaging in mindfulness, or maybe that may be coming as a result of doing those types of activities, is your clients may report things like headaches, fatigue, digestive problems, stomach problems, muscle tension, heart palpitations, so on and so forth. They may already be reporting these, but these are just some additional kind of physical symptoms that you may be monitoring for that have a root perhaps in your client's mental health. And I really actually like this next visual on the next slide that says, I wish people knew that my mental health is so physical too. And sometimes you may hear more of the physical complaints. You may hear more of the, I don't feel good, I'm tired, or I can't sit still, or my stomach's upset, when really there is a link to what's going on mentally, what's going on emotionally with the client. So sometimes this is a great place to start, is with those physical symptoms, to help people get in touch with A, what's going on, and B, linking that to what kind of symptoms they're experiencing and how we could then help them to cope with it. Because once we know what that symptom is, that's when we can match it with a skill, or we can match it with a technique to reduce those feelings. So to do that, a great thing to do is to use the activity of a body scan. This was emailed to you as a script. So sometimes people may want it read to them, or they may want to follow along and read the words. That's fine. I also am going to walk you through hearing it through an auto recording. Some people also may prefer to participate in it that way. So I have a couple options for how you can really guide somebody through kind of literally scanning their body from top to the bottom to kind of monitor for these symptoms, because sometimes they're very in touch with what's going on physically, and other times there could be sort of a disconnect or a cutoff, and they may not be aware even of the symptoms to begin with. So let's try it. It's going to actually be up here on the next slide. I'm going to ask you to just kind of follow the directions. It's going to tell you exactly what to do. It's going to tell you exactly for how long you're going to do it. This activity lasts about 8 minutes. So kind of get comfortable in your chair. And like I said, they'll direct you what to do, but do it for yourself for the next 8 minutes and just follow the directions as far as mindfulness and the physical symptoms. And then at the other side of it, when it's over, we can talk about it both ways. We can talk about what was it like for you to engage in this body scan activity, and then we can also talk about how might you use this with a client. So we can talk about both sides of those. So go ahead, get comfy. I'm going to play this on the next screen. Just follow the directions, and then we will touch base on the other side. Let me know if for some reason you can't hear this.
Welcome to the body scan relaxation exercise. Over the next several minutes, you will focus on the physical sensations throughout your body. These sensations might be the feeling of clothes on your skin, tension within your muscles, the temperature of the air, or anything else you can feel. Sometimes, you might not notice any sensation at all. Your job is to simply observe these sensations. You do not need to change how your body feels or do anything else. To begin, sit back or lie down in a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, or let your gaze soften. Take a few deep breaths. Notice the feelings all throughout your feet, including your sole, heel, toes, and top of the foot. Notice the sensation of the ground, your shoes, and anything else you can detect. travel up your body, noticing the sensations in your ankles, shins, and calves. Notice sensations both deep in the muscles and on the surface of your skin. Continue noticing the feelings in your legs as you move up your knees and thighs. Notice how your clothing feels against your skin. Continue moving up your body, taking note of the feelings in your hips and backside. Simply notice the feelings without any need to change them. Pay attention to the feelings in your lower back and abdomen. Notice how your body feels against the surface on which you're resting. For a few moments, pay attention to your breathing. Notice how your abdomen rises when you breathe in deeply and falls when you exhale. Experience the sensations in your upper back and chest. Notice the feeling of clothing on your body. Now, notice the feelings in your hands, fingers, and wrists. Notice the sensations in your forearms, upper arms, and shoulders. Pay attention to the feelings in your neck and throat. Notice the feelings in your face and head. Attend to every feature in your face, one by one. Finally, slowly scan your entire body, noticing all the sensations from your toes to the top of your head. The body scan exercise is coming to a close. At your own pace, allow your eyes to open. This concludes the body scan exercise. Welcome to the body scan.
Okay. Let's see if people are still awake. I know it's very relaxing. But I did want to have both of those kind of discussions. If you're comfortable sharing, that'd be great. What was that like for you? Or if you want to talk about it more, how would you use that with a client? I'd love to have kind of both of those discussions. So either unmute and share, that'd be great. Or if you want to put it in the chat, I'll keep an eye on that chat as well.
I'll say it doesn't work for me, really.
Okay.
I'm somebody who can't like listen to relaxation things for me to like kind of get things out of my head. It's more of like going
Okay.
for a run, a
Okay.
workout, something more physical. But I
Okay.
have used some type of like relaxation or guided meditation with some clients. If I know for a fact they're not going to leave their room, but you know they have a lot going on in their head, I'll have them lay down on their bed and I'll sit in a chair next to the bed and I'll just play it and I'll just be there with them to ensure like they're still comfortable. But for me, it does not work.
Okay. And I think that's a great point. Not for everybody. And maybe for your client to figure that out, they have to at least try it, at least try it once to kind of figure out. And there's also different kinds. There's many different kinds of those relaxation guided imagery. So maybe if one doesn't work, I would encourage them to try maybe something different. You can even get very specific with the sounds. I've seen one where you can choose even the type of campfire, or is it crickets, or is it water? Because some people like to hear water, other people don't like to hear water. So maybe you just need to find what's right. People have very unique preferences about sounds and things like that. So maybe it also just takes, finding the right one. Some people want to hear a male voice, some people want to hear a female voice. So lots of different things out there. But if it's also not for you, that's okay. Thank you for sharing, Seneca. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Either what was it like for you, if you're comfortable, or if you thought you might use this with a client, how might you implement something like this to help with mindfulness and kind of awareness of physical state?
I can go ahead.
Yeah.
Honestly, sorry, new one. I don't use it for myself, but I made this. I use it with my clients. It's Yoda, and
it's
then we
blurry.
set a timer.
Okay.
It's blurry.
Can you just read the top of it? What does the top of it say?
Yeah. Good for you meditation is we set a time for 10 minutes because she never done it. And the first time we did it was for 10 minutes, but she couldn't do it. She just stopped at 3 minutes.
Okay.
And then the next time that I saw her, we set the timer for 15 minutes. She did 15 minutes. And then it's like every 2 weeks we do it. So the next time that I saw her, we did it for 30 minutes. So now we're setting up the timer more higher. And she loved it. Yeah, she loved it.
Great. That's great. And good for you for keeping at it and seeing some benefit in the beginning and then keeping her going, trying it. And yeah, maybe you don't do that was 8 minutes that we just did. That could be a long time for some people. And I'm seeing in the chat, especially people who have ADHD or other kind of diagnosis, 8 minutes might be a lot. So maybe you start out with 1, start out with 2, and then there's nothing that says you can't slowly, increase. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see what else is in the chat. I have somebody who uses it at least twice a week. Somebody says could be used for anxiety and relaxation. Other people say it does not work for them because of ADHD, but they found other things that are helpful. So I appreciate those other resources. I will send the audio file of what we used in class today in case you wanted to use that, but please, use this class, use the people in this class, I would say, as other resources. And if you want to share, Brittany, those other if it's a website or if it's a certain app that you use, let us know what's been helpful. And I like to get information and have people share with each other. So thank you for giving us some new information. YouTube, okay, just YouTube, 8D audio. Okay, cool. I'll have to look into that. I've not heard of that. All right, great. Okay, so that's kind of the first step. Let me share my screen again. So that was the body scan, because literally you went, from top to bottom or bottom to top, kind of scanning each area of the body, feeling those sensations, just kind of noticing, being mindful. That could be the first step. Psychoeducation might be another part of it. So like I said, today we're going to talk about using multiple interventions, using multiple activities, either within the same session or kind of having a theme from session to session to session. We're going to talk about psychoeducation, then we're going to do the body scan, then we're going to do the next activity that's called the body map. So being planful and being intentional in what activities you're doing in what order can sometimes have, an increased benefit because you have a reason, that you're doing what you're doing. You're thinking about what would make the most sense logically and what would prepare the client. If they have that psychoeducation, they may understand the activity better. So maybe we start with psychoeducation, using the topic of mindfulness, letting the client know why you're engaging them in this, letting them know what benefit they could anticipate by participating in it. That's another piece of the puzzle. And then you may also want to use another activity called the body map. After you've done a body scan, this is kind of how you capture that data or capture the information that was gained by doing the body scan, is in something called a body map. So here are the directions. It says right on it, you will have your client draw or color on this figure where they're experiencing tension, stress, or relaxation. So when they did that body scan, what were they feeling and where? So you kind of want to take note of both of those. What areas of tension did they notice, but also what areas were relaxed? Because oftentimes you may think or you may feel like you're 100% tense, from head to toe, every muscle in your body. But when you think about it and when you really pay attention, you may notice, my hands and my arms are actually feeling pretty comfortable. They're feeling pretty relaxed. And how did I get that way? Could I use that, as a way to relax the rest of my body? So just being real mindful and then recording that information here. So this asks the client to reflect upon what physical symptoms they're experiencing and where. Suggested to do after a body scan. Again, it's another way to collect data and kind of a very visual representation for both you and your client to just instantly kind of see what they are experiencing and where. So you did get this as a handout. You got a blank one as a handout. But what I did here is I just kind of quickly, as a pretend client, scribbled where a client may be experiencing tension. So what you'll see here on the screen on September 13th, 2023 at 1:10, before doing the body scan, this particular client scribbled red, indicating tension in their jaw, their neck, their upper back, their shoulders, but they noted relaxation in their feet and their legs. Same day, same session, a little bit later at 2 p.m. after doing a body scan, this client just scribbled in red that they're feeling tension in their jaw, in their neck. But after the body scan, noted some relaxation still in their feet and their legs, but also now it extended to their arms and their hand. So just kind of quickly looking at this example, how might you use this data or how might you use this information from your client in session? Like, what would you do with this information going forward? You can either unmute and share, or please feel free to type in the chat what you might do. What might this tell you about your client before and after?
You would look for a pattern. So if they are always feel like, for example, somewhere tension, then they have anxiety, then it's like a pattern where you can see. And then you can also educate your client on like as a warning sign. They get like headaches or things like that. That when they feel it coming, that they can see it as a warning sign and then work on coping skills, how to prevent that they get at a state that they are very anxious, help them relax.
Yeah, I love that. So using this almost to like guide what is the next intervention, or kind of guide what is the next coping skill. It sounds like you're using it almost to guide treatment with your client. I like that. That's a great idea of how to use this information. Thank you for sharing that. Andrew says you could measure the reduction in symptoms. Okay. Could you say a little bit more about that, Andrew? What would you, again, what would you do with that decrease or increase? How would you address that with the client? If you want to put it in the chat, that's fine. Or if you don't have to unmute, that might be faster.
Saying if they feel like what we've done has made them less tense, then you're using the right coping skills.
Yeah, so that almost sounds like positive reinforcement. Good job reducing your symptoms, or this is exactly how much you have reduced your symptoms. Let's keep doing those skills, or let's keep going in that direction, but also giving them that positive feedback that they're doing. They're doing the work. You taught them the skill, but they're practicing it, or they're using it on a regular basis to make some progress toward reducing their symptoms. Yeah, so lots of different ways that you could use this, probably even more than we're thinking about right now, but you got to kind of have the data first before you can do something with it. So you may want to do this on a regular basis. You may want to do this at regular intervals. This is just more visual than like a GAD-7, or this is more visual, than like a PHQ-9. It kind of gives you similar type data, but it's more of a picture versus kind of giving a number. So kind of think about what makes sense to your client. Are they more number driven, or are they more visual? This might make more sense to them. They may be doing some other. You still need to do the GAD-7 and PHQ-9, but this may be another way to still kind of address the same topic with the client. So those are just two ways that you would use perhaps mindfulness, and then follow it up with a body scan, body map, then as a way to capture that information. Another way, or something else that you might want to follow up after a body scan with, is to use it as a way to get your client into their wise mind. And if you remember back to series 1, we did a little bit of information about DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy. And that's when we learned about the wise mind, which is kind of a intersection of our reasonable mind, which is facts and logic, and our emotional mind, which is, thinking and behaving kind of without reason, just based on emotions, seeing that people tend to make their best decisions, taking both of those into consideration, being in their wise mind. So once you have, used that mindfulness activity to calm down, or to kind of get into your wise mind, that's kind of the next step towards going forward. So this is, again, combining other interventions or combining other activities. You may want to use the body scan in order to get somebody into their wise mind. So just to kind of refresh on DBT, what it is, dialectical behavioral therapy uses that idea of these three parts of our mind: reasonable mind, wise mind, and emotional mind, to kind of remove some emotionality from the situation, kind of the middle ground between those two parts of our brain. So that's kind of a good segue into the different types of symptoms that we're looking at. And sometimes we don't think of thoughts as being a symptom of mental health diagnosis, but thoughts are definitely symptoms as well. Just real quick, these come right from your GAD-7 and PHQ-9. These are the thought symptoms that you're actually monitoring on those outcome measures. Things like not being able to control worry, worrying too much, not being able to concentrate would be anxiety. Also kind of an overlap with depression, with trouble concentrating. Other thoughts might be being preoccupied with death, or dying, or thinking one would be better off dead. So those are kind of some examples that you may be more familiar with for anxiety and depression. as far as thought symptoms. What we talk about less often might be diagnosis like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Those type of thought symptoms may look like racing thoughts, again, being easily distracted, but impaired thinking. So poor decision-making, poor cause and effect thinking. For schizophrenia, the thought symptoms might be more like delusions, meaning they're having thoughts that are not in touch with reality or just disorganized thinking. So as we're looking at the different types of symptoms that we are monitoring, we've already mentioned DBT earlier. Just want to make a note here that CBT approaches or cognitive behavioral therapy actually is not recommended for individuals who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia because we are like kind of directly challenging thoughts. However, later on in treatment, CBT may be appropriate once there is a more strong therapeutic relationship. So just be kind of thinking about where in treatment you may be using a CBT approach if your person has schizophrenia. You want to make sure that you have worked with them for a while and you guys have a good working relationship first. So just some examples of what may be considered thought symptoms. Way to gather data or way to kind of track those thought symptoms might be to use what we call thought monitoring. We're going to show you some handouts that would help you to not only track that information, but also kind of give you and yourself insight into the progress that your client is making towards managing thought symptoms. So specifically what those thoughts may look like that you're monitoring. So kind of more specific thoughts might be negative thought patterns, racing or anxious thoughts. We'll talk here about cognitive distortions or thinking errors here in a minute. But those are probably some that you're already hearing your clients talk about, is just having negative thought patterns or just reporting, having the same type of anxious racing thoughts over and over again. But I'm curious if anybody out there has maybe taken another training or taken some other kind of class, or maybe just learned yourself about what are called cognitive distortions or thinking errors. And if so, could you name or maybe describe a common cognitive distortion or a common thinking error? Does that sound familiar to anyone? Either in the chat or you can unmute and share. Okay. I'll get you started. I'll just name a couple examples. So some that you may have heard of before might be things like black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking. You may hear distortions like jumping to conclusions or mind reading. Those are very common cognitive distortions. Labeling or mislabeling are other types of common cognitive distortions. So as we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, those are some of the those are some of the thoughts that are being changed or looking at being restated in ways that are more true or in ways that just kind of feel better to think about. So we don't have time to cover those in TBSU. I really wish we did. But please look into or Google cognitive distortions or thinking errors or bring it up with your supervisor. That is definitely a more advanced type of CBT skill. But let's look at how you might be monitoring thoughts or what you might use to monitor thoughts with your clients. Remembering that the goal of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is to reduce those unwanted thoughts and emotions by challenging those irrational thoughts. So what are we thinking that is not true? Or what are we thinking that we have no evidence for? So the first step is to just recognize that and then to record that. So this is one of the handouts that was sent to you. It's called a thought record. I have a zoomed in version here in a second so you can see it better. But the first step is how you would use this handout is to teach clients just kind of about the interaction between their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and kind of use this handout as a tool for them to record their own experiences. So, through meeting with your client, when you are having your session, you may, as you're talking to them, hear them identify a difficult situation that they encountered. As they're telling you about it, you may hear some of the thoughts that they had. Oh, somebody walked right by me in the dining room this morning and they didn't even look at me. They looked the other way and they ignored me. And then you may hear some thoughts about they don't like me or they're mad at me. Those are the thoughts that they're thinking about it. And then as they're telling you the story, you may hear some emotions come up. I was hurt or I was offended. whatever were the emotions that came up based on the situation of that person walking right by them. So what did they do? Did they go up and talk to that person? Did they leave the dining room in a huff? What was their reaction? What was their behavior as a result of that situation? And then after, some time has gone by, what are some alternative thoughts? What else could be used to explain why that person walked right by them? Maybe they didn't even see you sitting there, or maybe they were focused on getting across the room to go get their food. What are some alternative explanations for what happened? And then how does it feel to think those alternative thoughts? Doesn't it feel a little bit better to see the situation in that light versus that person doesn't like me, that person is ignoring me, that person is upset with me? So this may come up naturally just through your session with the client, or this may be something that you're working on in a more targeted way. Tell me about a situation that happened last week. Tell me how you thought about it. Tell me what was your emotion. Tell me what you did. So depending on your client, you may approach this in different ways. Please don't forget to also provide, again, some psychoeducation about CBT after they have identified and maybe explain these terms to them, those kind of harmful, irrational thoughts. Explain to them how they will start to be able to change them, which leads to feeling better, which leads to more positive emotions, which then in turn leads to more helpful behavior. So please give them some psychoeducation on what CBT is and kind of why you're engaging them in this thought record and how is this going to be helpful to them going forward. So let me go ahead and open an example of one that has been filled out. So you might be able to have an idea of how you would use this with a client. So just give me 1 second. I'll open that example. And we can talk about what you might do with this with a client, this information. And I might need to make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. Okay, so situation, thought, emotions, behaviors, and then coming up with an alternative thought. Let's just do the first one going across, and then we'll talk about how you might use this with your client. So the situation is lunchtime for this client. The thoughts that they're having around lunchtime is, I don't feel like going to the dining room and socializing. I'm too tired. They can bring my food to my room. When the client thinks that, the emotions that come up is dread about going to the dining room, just exhaustion. They don't want to get out of bed, anxiety about having to leave their room, which leads to the behaviors of just staying in bed, behavior of asking staff to bring them their lunch to their room. But through working with their TBS and maybe some discussion and some brainstorming, they came up with alternative thoughts about the situation of lunchtime, which is, there is one person I wouldn't mind talking to. If Diane is going to the dining room, maybe we can sit together. So it just feels a little bit better to think there is somebody there for me at the dining room versus I don't feel like going, I'm too tired. They can just bring me my food to my room. So just an example I made up. So as I was talking about this particular thought record, and as I kind of explained, the CBT approach, did anybody have a client that came up that you might want to use this thought record with, who seems to be having either negative thought patterns over and over again, or maybe racing thoughts, that having an alternative thought may help them to feel better or to have more positive behavior as a result of that? Anything come up for anybody?
I've used this before with somebody. I have a client who's pretty angry all the time.
Okay.
Goes through it. But we've used this before, and it kind of put some stuff into perspective for him. He's still the same way. I don't see him ever changing.
Okay.
But how he uses his words towards people in a manner, we kind of put this through, because he'll go into a situation and his first thought is to be mean to somebody. So we've kind of used this. It helped. I think it's also like a per situation thing, that client has to be receptive to using this and implementing it. And I think that was the case with him. He was receptive, but he was not going to implement it.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. They have to be ready to kind of hear it before maybe they make any changes. I would agree with that. But thank you for sharing. I'm glad to hear that you're using this. We have something in the chat. Kristen says you have a client who thinks her sister's died every session. Oh my gosh, but her sister has not passed away. Okay. So how do you use it with that type of client? It sounds like they have some kind of memory impairment. How do you implement that with that person, if you don't mind sharing? Oh, Kristen, if you're talking, you might need to unmute. Was it Kristen who shared that? Yes, Kristen. Kristen, are you able to unmute and just talk a little bit about that client?
I haven't tried this method, but I was going to.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not really sure.
Okay. Yeah. I would maybe talk to your supervisor about it. If this person has a memory impairment, this may, I don't know your client, so that's why I'm saying check in with your supervisor.
She has schizophrenia. She has schizophrenia.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, still check in. Yeah, still check in and see, if your client's ready for it, if that, therapeutic relationship is there. Definitely could be helpful with that population, but think about what you're doing. You're like challenging something that they actually do believe is true. So I would just use a little bit of caution and check with your supervisor first in that type of a situation. But could absolutely be helpful depending on what your client is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can this be used for like reality-based thinking too? In a sense, or no?
Are you talking about like reality testing for schizophrenia, or are you talking about like reframing?
No, yeah, like kind of like reframing, trying to like rethink how to do this, I guess. I'm trying to say.
Yeah, this is very similar. So we were talking just a couple of minutes ago about those negative thinking, or excuse me, those thinking errors. This could be used kind of to challenge the evidence. That's another way to think about it. That's another skill related to CBT. So yeah, it's kind of along the same lines as those. It's another CBT skill. Thinking of alternative thoughts, challenging the evidence. Those are all very, very similar related CBT skills. Yeah.
I have an example.
Sure.
I have a client and she goes to dialysis. And so the nurses want her to drink the special drink when you go to dialysis, because they take out with the bad all the good stuff out and it gives extra nutrition. So when she was younger, this client, she was severely overweight. And so she doesn't want to drink it because she thinks that drinking that makes her really fat. To say that's what she thinks in her head. And so I explained the purpose of the drink, and then she told me that she weighed like 300 pounds or something. And so then I said, so what is your weight now? And so then I put the weight what she was and what she imagined by drinking that. Then she saw like it was like almost like 150 pounds or something that had to gain. And then she realized how unrealistic it was, her thinking, that she thought like, I drink this and then she imagined herself like 300 pounds. But when we put the numbers there, then she was like, oh. And then I said, so what do you think, like what's the period of time that you're gonna think that you're gonna get by drinking this like 300 pounds? Then she realized like that it was kind of not realistic, and it helped her to have less fear of that drink and say, okay. And then she was more able like to understand and to see like, okay, I need to drink this and then I feel less tired. And then she was willing to do one drink a day and started with that. So it was just like this whole thought process of showing her what she was thinking and how realistic it really was. And that helped her to see that it wasn't. And then she changed her behavior.
Yeah. And I think what you said there is like the key is that it's a process. Like for us to come in, the second day or the third day and to just tell them, that's irrational, or that's not true, they're not going to hear it. But it sounds like you worked with this person and you didn't tell them the reality. You helped them to kind of see it themselves. And I think that's a big part of CBT is you just presented the data, you were encouraging, you were positive, you didn't try to force it, and then in their own time, they came to see it. And I think another skill or something else that we have available to us is to maybe start with examples or to start with other people, because maybe people are able to see those irrational thoughts in other people before we're able to see it in ourselves. And it can also be a skill. So maybe they're good at identifying, countering negative thoughts, or they're good at making rational restatements with other people. And then once they're good at it, they can do it for themselves. So for that exact reason, thank you for sharing that, Henny. I appreciate that. That's a good segue into practicing it, because it is a skill. We provided you with 2 handouts. One is for depression, one is for anxiety, and I believe we even have one for negative thoughts. To get good at changing negative thoughts into more, like you said, rational or realistic thoughts. It's a skill that can be practiced. It can be something that you become good at. So here's just one little zoomed in screenshot of that handout to help your client develop this skill. So you would explain it in this way, that this handout is to help you learn how to come up with rational counter statements for these negative thoughts below. And we'll start with other people first. So somebody thought somebody was, or I was mean to someone at day program, they'll probably want to kick me out soon because I can't act right. Well, looking at that person's situation, a more rational counter statement would be, I made a mistake, but everybody does that from time to time. I usually get a lot of positive feedback. I'll be careful to not make that mistake again. So if we can help them to get good at this with other people, the thought is eventually they'll be able to do it with themselves, helping a person to use their wise mind. So looking at the facts, but also recognizing the feelings that are involved in the situation as well. Let's just practice one in the interest of time. I don't want time to get away from us today. But if somebody would be able to come up with a rational counter statement for that second one. My roommate was angry yesterday and he yelled at me for being messy. I'm so irresponsible. What would be a more rational counter statement to that? Anybody want to give that a try, either in the chat or you can just unmute and share. Either way is fine. We got some very cut and dry things there. I'm so responsible. It's very, that's kind of putting yourself into a corner there, putting yourself into a box. Is it true that that person is always irresponsible? Is that possible? Okay, Henny, I see you're shaking your head no. So maybe that is part of the rational, restatement or the rational counter statement. You're not always irresponsible. Maybe we could restate it in that way and start on that end of it. So this is the skill. You're going to have to practice it with your client for them to get good at it. Oh, somebody put something in the chat. Sorry. Okay, so I think Tiffany is saying, or I'm sorry, Brittany is saying it could be, but this one is difficult. Yeah, this one is kind of a hard one. So maybe it is that the roommate yelled at them for being messy. Maybe we need to check. Let's ask. Let's find out. Is your roommate, first of all, mad at you? Secondly, is it because you're messy? And it's not always true that you are always irresponsible. So kind of recognizing the facts of the situation, also recognizing your client's feelings. So we have that handout, which is for challenging negative thoughts. Very similar is this countering anxiety producing thoughts. It's the same idea, except here we're looking specifically at anxiety as a chance for your client to use their wise mind. And then the last activity we're going to learn about is called behavioral activation, because behaviors are symptoms too. We learned about many different types of behaviors. So especially with depression, we can think of a lot of behaviors that are associated with the depression. Sleeping a lot, sometimes eating a lot, isolating ourselves, becoming withdrawn are very common behaviors that go along with depression. It's kind of a vicious cycle. For example, somebody becomes inactive and they become more depressed. The more depressed they become, the more inactive they are. It's kind of this never-ending cycle, especially with depression. You can think of behavior and mood as having this spiraling effect. So think of activity or behavior as spiraling mood up or down. As enjoyable activities are completed, more often our mood tends to go up. And also, as we complete those enjoyable activities, with less frequency, our mood goes down. So the less we go out and have fun, the less we're going to feel good about ourselves. So the idea behind behavioral activation is that we are deliberately practicing certain behaviors to then produce that positive feeling. And you may, again, need to educate your client that you may not feel great the first time you exercise, but after repeating that exercising over time, eventually you will start to have those feel-good emotions, those feel-good chemicals going through your body, but it may take some time to get that habit and to get those feelings. So how you want to use behavioral activation is to kind of maybe put the behavior before the feeling, that you are doing things that people who are not depressed do, so that eventually you will feel not depressed, if that makes sense. Or also sort of acting as if you were not depressed. So kind of how it is explained here is that this model suggests that negative life events like grief, other daily stressors can lead to us having few positive experiences. You may turn to unhealthy behaviors when you're not feeling good, like drug use, sleeping too much, an attempt to kind of avoid those negative feelings and experience a little bit of pleasure, even if it's just while you eat that ice cream, for 10 minutes. But it's just temporary. You just feel good for the 10 minutes while you're eating ice cream. You don't feel better afterwards, and sometimes you actually feel worse. So what you're doing, especially as a TBS with behavioral activation, is encouraging your client to schedule those activities that help them to feel better, to kind of plan ahead, to boost those feelings of pleasure, and also to boost kind of feelings of mastery. So this is where you come in as a TBS, is to help the client to schedule it, to plan it, make the steps for it to occur, so that we can increase the likelihood that they will improve their mood. May also be looking to you to kind of provide that positive reinforcement and to help them with the planning. So the behavioral activation sheet can definitely walk you and your client through it. What are the activities they enjoy? Also, what are responsibilities they have to take care of in their life? The homework then is to try doing at least one of those activities or responsibility each day. And then after they've done it, they're going to rate their scale of depression, pleasant feelings, and sense of achievement before and after the activity. So let me just go right to showing you the example so you can see what it is that a completed behavioral activation would look like. So this client, I just made them up. Their activities they enjoy are reading, crossword puzzles, and painting. Excuse me. The 3 responsibilities they need to take care of is calling Social Security, attending physical therapy every week, and completing paperwork to appoint their son as power of attorney. So they actually did call Social Security Monday at 11. Before the phone call, their depression was at a 3. Their level of pleasure was at a 0, and their sense of achievement was at a 0. However, after making that phone call to Social Security, their depression was still at a 3. Their pleasure was still at a 0, but they had quite a bit of a sense of achievement. It went up to a 7. So I think this illustrates that even though we sometimes have to do things that we don't want to do, it may not improve our mood. Sometimes we may not get any pleasure from it, but we can sometimes get a sense of achievement from it. And then with other activities, it may actually improve our feelings of depression. Other activities may give us quite a bit of sense of pleasure. So this one kind of breaks it down into those 3 categories, which I think is great to show that sometimes we will see improvements in certain areas. So that is the behavioral activation sheet and how you might use that. Another thing that we have provided for you is a list of 50 enjoyable activities, because sometimes people who are depressed may tell you, I can't even think of one thing that I might enjoy. So you're going to want to come prepared with a list of things to suggest that your client may enjoy, or you may suggest things that you have seen them doing. So that is just how you would fill out the behavioral activation. We already looked at the example and we already went over the scores. I think the scores are important to kind of compare from week to week, again, with that data collection to positively reinforce improvement over time. Okay, real quick, let's just look at what a note would look like for this week. Symptom monitoring. The client response example here is Betty was agreeable to complete a body scan guided meditation, and afterwards shared that she noticed tightness in her shoulders and neck. Betty was provided with psychoeducation about physical symptoms of anxiety and stated, I've been so tense lately because I'm worried about my sister. Betty was provided with a thought record to track her anxious thoughts. Betty identified my sister thinks I'm a burden as a thought she would like to replace, and identified my sister loves me and wants the best for me as a healthier alternative thought. So we got a couple things going on in here. We got a body scan, we got psychoeducation about symptoms, and we also went through the thought record and replaced a irrational thought with a healthier alternative thought. So that's what it might look like to do those three activities within the same session. An example of homework for that particular session is Betty will write in her thought record when she's feeling anxious about 3 different situations this week to detail her anxious thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and alternative thoughts. Betty will share at least 1 entry at next session. So we have what she's going to do. We have really why she's doing it. We have how many times she's going to do it, and then how we're going to use that going forward in treatment. So those are all good examples of how to implement some of the activities that we learned about today in class. We have 1 minute left. What questions do you have about symptom monitoring, or just questions in general about the class for today?
I wanted to ask, can we use, instead of the body scan, like the calming music one?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
Calming music, because that can also has the same effect.
Sure. Yeah.
Like
Again, as long as
music for anxiety.
Yeah, as long as you're clear in the activity and you're clear in your progress note, the rationale that you're doing this to be mindful, that it has a relationship back to decreasing mental health symptoms, sure.
Okay.
Sure, that's fine. So you just don't want to listen to music, but we're listening to relaxating music to identify, physical symptoms of anxiety and decrease them. That would be.
I've like on Spotify, I have like music, calming music for anxiety. So I always put that on.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, as long as you can tie it back to the activity intervention and the mental health. That sounds good to me. Good question. Anybody else? And I can stay on for a few minutes after 5 o'clock if anybody has any additional questions or wants to talk about anything one-to-one. Otherwise, Stacy will be sending you the quiz. She'll be grading quizzes and giving feedback on notes. And I will continue to be your instructor, so you can also address any questions to me. Otherwise, I will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a great week and happy symptom monitoring.